The data-sucking, metadata-drinking, surveillance-fueled AI beast has awakened. The worldwide technocratic vampire squid, coiled around every packet, every click, every scroll, is bleeding the soul of the internet to feed its quantum godbrain of control. And your VPN? A fake, a fraud, a corporate sock puppet of the Five Eyes Frankenstein. However, in episode 2 of season 3 of the Outlaw Crypto Podcast, we crack open the Black Mirror and summon from the encrypted depths a true warrior of liberty, a renegade cryptographer, an OG of the cypherpunk underground. Harry Halpin, the heroic CEO of Nym VPN, the mad scientist who weaponized the mixnet, is our very special guest, and he's here to burn down the panopticon with mathematics. That's right. Harry Halpin, the digital anarchist alchemist who once haunted the halls of academia and now builds bulletproof anonymity machines out of rust, sweat, and quantum-proof cryptography. No slogans, no fake, no log policies, no Patriot Act backdoors, just pure cryptographic resistance coded at midnight in the shadows of Langley's nightmares. He has unleashed Nym VPN, the first and only mixnet-based VPN built for the mainstream masses. A metadata-destroying, zero-knowledge-wielding, open-source freedom tunnel that outtours Tor, outhides Nord, and outflanks every fake privacy promise peddled by Silicon Valley's surveillance sycophants. Harry Halpin and the Nym crew have forged a two-mode weapon of liberation. Fast mode, the two-hop speed demon, powered by Amnesia WireGuard, slicing through the net with encrypted fury. Anonymous mode, a 5-hop mixnet juggernaut, scrambling your IP, annihilating metadata, and vomiting static into the ears of AI surveillance crawlers like a digital banshee of justice. No email, no identity, no leash, no master. Pay with crypto, slip through the cracks, vanish into digital mist. And he didn't stop there. With Chelsea Manning, the whistle-blowing war priestess herself, at the helm of security, this isn't a project. It's a cryptographic insurrection, Patriot Act proof, NSA toxic, ISP blinding. This episode is a data stream liberation ritual, a protocol exorcism, a rallying cry to the forgotten digital freedom fighters who refuse to be strip searched by ISPs and cataloged by ad tech demons. The Outlaw Crypto Podcast bows to no state, no corporate overlords, and neither does Harry Halpin. So grab your headphones, grab your Faraday hoodie, and tune in. Because once you hear how Halpin and Nym are crushing the surveillance economy, you'll never trust a no-logs VPN again. The mixnet rises, the firewalls crumble, the matrix bleeds, and Harry Halpin leads the charge.
Welcome back to another episode of the Outlaw Crypto Podcast. I'm your host, Paranoia Machinery, and this is a podcasting 2.0 podcast, which means you can stream sats, you can boost on the Fountain app or any podcasting 2.0 app, and you can also support the show through XMR chat by donating Monero. Today, I am very, very happy to welcome my guest, Harry Halpin, the CEO of Nym. Nym is a mixnet and VPN, which also has a token, and we're going to get into why. So, Harry, how are you? Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, so great to hear from you again. I think the big news of the last week or so is that we finally launched Nym VPN. And so what Nym VPN is, it's like an app that gives you an easy to access, easy to use interface to the mixnet. So it looks like a VPN, but actually when you hit that connect button and you hit anonymous mode, then you're actually getting mixnet level network anonymity out the box for all your traffic. That is, and that's I think something which is a first, and we're very happy that it's just super easy to download and to use now after years of requiring you had to kind of use it through like API calls or various proxies like SOX proxy.
So now that it's live, what's the response been? Like, have you guys had like an overwhelming demand from privacy conscious users?
We've definitely had a good demand for privacy conscious users. I wouldn't say it's overwhelming. The servers are still up. We had a lot of demand on the day of launch, and the servers, got a bit overloaded. It is a decentralized network, so we added new servers by just kind of expanding the set of allowed servers. Now, some of those servers, unfortunately, are a bit low quality, so now you have a quality control problem. But effectively, the way you want to think about Nym is that there's a certain user demand for privacy. We don't know what that is, and we don't know if they know about us. I imagine most people on your show probably haven't heard of us. We're quite niche, so to speak. And then there's the supply of privacy. So the supply of privacy is the computers that are providing the infrastructure. And the more there's demand, the more the supply can increase. So on that level, it's a radically different departure from like a centralized VPN or one company runs all the servers. And I can explain in detail if you want why I think that's pretty dangerous, even for cool companies. And it's also, I think more similar to Tor or a traditional peer-to-peer network, but it's not purely volunteer run. We expect people who are running these servers to make a bit of money. And okay. Therefore, when there's more demand, the supply increases. And it took I would say about 3 days to settle out after launch, and now there's like this kind of steady demand. But then we haven't actually started like marketing and because basically there's like any new software, there's a bunch of bugs, user interface bugs, various things failing on different operating systems. So we have to fix all those before we really push it mainstream. So it's still early.
Okay. And I guess like for people that don't know, what's a mixnet and like how is it different from like normal internet?
Yeah, so I think there's like an interesting hypothetical question, which is how can I actually be anonymous on the internet? So if for those people that understand encryption tells you how you can encrypt the content of a message. If I'm sending you an encrypted email or signal message, that content is encryption, but the metadata, the fact that I'm sending to you is recorded. There's been it's known. So, for example, if I'm using WhatsApp and I'm sending a message to you, WhatsApp knows who's sending the message when, even if the message itself was encrypted in such a way that the WhatsApp servers can't read it. And this is the same for Monero, peer-to-peer broadcast, Bitcoin peer-to-peer broadcast. If I'm sending some Bitcoin out, maybe it's just from one pub key to another pub key. But the fact of the matter that when I sent it is completely public, and how many transactions I did, like even like in a minute, right? Or 10 minutes. And so if I do a lot of transactions, those transactions are recorded. That's the same with Lightning as well. And this is a big problem because first thing, if let's say I'm a hostile government, or I can watch, I can just say, hey, what's up? I can just ask them, even if they don't have the keys to decrypt the message, I can ask them, well, who sent messages to who, when, and where, what groups are they in? That information is all public. You say, well, screw it. I'm not going to use WhatsApp. That's effectively, not secure and not private enough. I'm going to use Signal. And Signal, luckily, does not, they use a bunch of tricks with secure hardware to obscure that information. But the fact of the matter that you're using Signal and that, and you're sending a Signal message to somebody, and there might be like another suspect who's also receiving a Signal message.
Yeah.
That the fact that I've accessed the servers when, and I've sent a message over of this many bytes, so forth and so on, that can all be observed, not even by Signal itself, who I think it's safe to assume is trustworthy, but by someone watching the Signal servers. And the problem gets even worse with Bitcoin, because you have situations where, I'm broadcasting a transaction, it goes all these full nodes, eventually gets in the blockchain, basically ditto with Monero. But we do know that Chainalysis literally sits there, controls Bitcoin full nodes. It's revealed in 2014 or 15. So they can, there's suspicions even then they controlled a huge percentage of the full nodes, the network. And I know that Chainalysis is after Monero as well. So I would assume the same there. So they just run these nodes, and sure, they're relaying, they're not dropping your transaction, because if they drop the transaction, you would notice. they're just relaying it. But when they're relaying it, they're recording things like your IP address and when it was sent. And your IP address then more or less locates you, down the neighborhood you're in. And these leaks of IP addresses, they're super important. One of the guys, I just off the top of my head, Jeremy Hammond, who was an anarchist, who was involved in all the kind of anonymous hacking group stuff back in the day. He eventually got nailed because of this IP address leaking, because it was leaking through his router and to his phone company, and the phone company then handed it, I guess, to the FBI, and then he got arrested and put in jail, right? Mm-hmm. So there's pretty serious repercussions. Even things as innocent as the IP address can be used to locate you. And then even if you try to hide the IP address, let's say we're using a normal VPN or Tor, and I'm the enemy, I just go one step back, right? I just say, okay, well, oh, look, you're hiding your IP address using, hideme.com or something. I just go talk to hideme.com, and I'm like, hey, who was using your VPN, when and where? And oh, by the way, you also have all the payment records. You have all these credit card addresses. Is this person one of your customers? If I don't know who you are, who was using it at this moment, and then I can find your address and your ID through asking, hideme.com, a centralized VPN, for that payment data. So this is all very dangerous stuff. Even Tor, which is really best of breed, you could do statistical analysis on Tor to determine, you look at the entry, exit in the Tor, the exit nodes of Tor, the gate, the entry nodes, and you can basically do these, what you call a statistical correlation task. Say, okay, I know you're using Tor, and I was observing, I don't know, some website in the dark web, and now I can link these two facts together because I'm observing your Tor through your internet connection. So it was clear. This question has been around since like the beginning of cryptography. In the 1970s, the same time we had Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman basically invent Diffie-Hellman key exchange, and that was like the first public crypto. And then RSA kind of came out with like a better algorithm to actually do it. We had this huge problem where people said, well, how do we hide who's communicating to who? And so another cryptographer, this genius called David Chaum, he invented a concept called mixnets. And mixnets are actually much more easy to understand than cryptography. You don't need to understand number theory. You don't need to understand elliptic curves. You don't need to understand ring signatures. It's pretty simple. You just say, I have a node. I have a computer. Everyone's going to send messages to that computer. And that computer is going to shuffle those messages like a deck of cards. Mm-hmm. They're going to hold them for some period of time and send them out in a different order than they receive them. It's a very simple concept. It's really like shuffling a deck of cards. And that's the original, what we call Chaumian mixnet.
Okay.
And then what it can be proven that you cannot, if you send all the messages out at the same time, so forth and so on, you can't distinguish, and all the messages are encrypted. You can't tell who sent who a message. But the problem with these mixnets is historically they've been used by the cypherpunks. We go into that as interesting Nakamoto connections, but they weren't really made for like everyday internet usage. They weren't put into like something someone could actually use easily. They're just kind of used for email, hiding email addresses. So we're trying to really, with a kind of new mixnet design, which I'm happy to go into, we're pushing a mixnet that's for general purpose internet traffic. They can give you general purpose anonymous networking. And we think that's a goal of, it's important for human freedom, important for preserving privacy. And it's a goal the cypherpunks have had since the invention of cryptography that far predates Bitcoin. And it's important to make that contribution because we need anonymous networking now more than ever.
I think so too. So with Nym and the mixnet, is it like its own network? You know how like Tor is like a different network than the regular internet, the ClearNet, and like you can visit ClearNet sites or whatever through Tor, but like, can you do that with Nym, or is it like ITP where it's its own network and it's separate from the ClearNet?
No, it's just like Tor in that fashion. So what Tor is and what Nym is they're called anonymous overlay networks. So you take the normal internet and you build a network inside of it.
Okay.
Right. And so, I send my TCP/IP or my UDP, you send my packets. I want to go to, whatever, darkweb.com. and you send your packets through Tor, and you can go to darkweb.com, and darkweb.com is on the other side of Tor, or secure drop at Wall Street Journal or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And Nym works the same way. You can send your packets over Nym, but the difference is, unlike Tor, they get mixed up and fake packets are added, right? So the packets are all mixed. Your packets are just mixed with random other people's packets. You don't know who they are. And then we add fake packets, and then those packets pop out the other side of Nym, and you can access the normal internet. So I can access, Wikipedia. I can access, if you can stream video, you can access whatever you want. So it's its own anonymous overlay network. We don't share nodes with Tor. We don't share nodes with any mainstream VPN providers. In fact, it's designed so that we don't know who these nodes are. It's a permissionless network. Anyone can jump in, turn their computer on, because we're kind of emulating Bitcoin this way, say, hey, I want to mix some packets on my bandwidth, and just join the network. And then they get rewarded based on how many packets they join. So unlike Tor, we have a kind of rewarding mechanism built into the mixnet itself. For those that are interested, Tor also supports what's called onion services. So it's like, I would like to access, darkweb.onion. And that is not something that Nym allows right now, because to be frank, the way that Tor designs onion services is pretty shaky. There's been a lot of, people who use onion services. You've seen a lot of takedowns of them.
Yeah.
They use something called a distributed hash table, which then what happens is the enemy kind of overloads the hash table, can kind of shape your traffic. That's pretty dangerous. So that's an active kind of area of research. We've actually offered to research that topic with Tor, because we think we should have more and more secure private websites. That being said, the way that a mixnet, because mixnets are originally designed to do email with higher latency environments, so mixnets are really ideal for things like chat bots, like Telegram, email. So while I think, it'd be websites work, but they're kind of slow because all of the mixing and the fake traffic.
Okay.
So I think if you want to make something truly anonymous, you'd kind of want like anonymous email clients, anonymous chat services, and that we could easily support. And we would love it if developers showed up and tried experimenting with those things. That being said, we also realize that people sometimes just want the internet to be fast, and they don't want to be completely anonymous. So if you download our app, it's just like Nym VPN on Google Play or F-Droid or Apple, whatever they call it, Apple Store. What you do, you have a choice, and it says either anonymous mode, which is the mixnet, or fast mode. And fast mode just like turns off the mixing. It still adds a little bit of noise and fake traffic, so that's why it's pretty good for censorship resistance. It's going to get better. We're actually experimenting right now, making sure it can't be trying to make it less and less censorable. It doesn't work in China quite yet, but does work quite well in Russia. However, regardless, we have a fast mode. So you can be like, I actually just want the internet to be fast, but I still want to go through a decentralized service. So you just basically you do something very similar to where you pop into an entry node, you pop out an exit node in a different country. And because these nodes, these computers, these servers are ran by mutually independent people who we don't even know. They're ran by anonymous people who somewhat like Bitcoin miners are technically anonymous. The chance that we think that makes it more secure even than a normal VPN, because a normal VPN, kind of one party has all the info. And here, like the entry knows who you are, maybe not who you are, but they know your IP address, but the exit doesn't. So the exit just knows where you're going, but they don't know where you came from. And that's the same general principle that Tor uses.
Okay.
So we have, sorry, a bit of a long explanation, but there's a lot going on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the detail that you're putting into the responses, because a lot of people do not nerd out on this stuff as much as you do. So thank you for providing that context. So like using Nym, if you're on the mixnet, can you like watch a YouTube video? Or is it too slow for that? Like, how fast is it?
Yeah. Well, on the fast mode, you can definitely watch a video.
Yeah.
For the mixed network, you can watch videos, but they have to be lower resolution.
Okay.
I forget exactly, but you can't watch them in like, 4K or whatever. You definitely can't watch them in like, 1060, but you can definitely watch them in like 680 or something. Like it depends. Like you can watch them in a lower resolution.
Okay. And then
it's typically kind of okay for audio streaming. So podcasts and stuff, it seems to work reasonably well.
Well, that's awesome. Another question I have is like with Tor, there's onion addresses, right? Does Nym have like an equivalent of like its own formatted like hidden services and things of that nature, like for the mixnet?
Yeah, that's what I said. We don't, because it's we have. I mean, just to be really technical. So the short version is not right now. Again, that's an open research topic.
Okay.
We've often work with Tor on it. The other short version is Nym is very ideal, not for anonymous website, but anonymous chat channel or chat program or anonymous email.
Okay.
So that's kind of what we're built for, because, we take these packets, we wrap them in the messages, we send them around, we mix them, and you can have a website, but it's going to be a little bit slow. And mixnets are built around this kind of more conversational style of internet, where I am sending you a message, I'm getting a response. Now you would say, how does that work? Because if I can send email or let's say Telegram messages anonymously over Nym, how is it I can get a response? And the answer is in the architecture of Nym. If I want to send you an email, I want to get a response, and that response is anonymous. I don't have your address. How can I send you a response back?
Yeah.
So what you do is you make a pseudonym, which is called a single use reply block or SERB, and you put that pseudonym in your encrypted message. So I send you an encrypted message and you decrypt that message. Inside that message is a pseudonym. And what that pseudonym is, it's the address, it's the key for an entry point. And we have, again, hundreds of entry points into the mixnet. And it kind of serves as a drop box. You say, oh, you want to respond to me? Well, I'm not going to tell you my address. I'm not going to tell you my name. But I've got this like anonymous Dropbox. You can just drop me messages there, and only I can pick them up, right? And so that's literally what you do. And we even and then I pick that message up then from you, and when you send me a message, you actually include an anonymous pseudonym for yourself, because you also don't reveal who you are. And then I pick your message up, I decrypt it, I find your anonymous, your pseudonym, and I say, oh, well, that's the SERB for you, and I send you another message with a like a completely new anonymous SERB, and that you play that game, and that you can iterate that, and you can see how that looks like a chat. I'm like, hey, I like to talk. I want to, let's say, whistleblow this secret. You say, great. You say, can you prove who you are? You give me some proof back, and I drop you the secret. And it works by this kind of series of drop boxes. So that would be a really cool project for someone to work on. If anyone's interested in that, we're a bit surprised. We don't have more people building these kind of anonymous chat bots or email services, file storage over Nym. We've had a few hackathons. So we've got some demo code up there, but nothing like, I would say, super user-friendly. We will eventually build this sort of stuff ourselves, but we prefer other people build it. It's like faster. We have to do a lot of maintenance on the core network itself.
Okay. Cool. Well, that's super interesting. Thank you for that response. I want to take it back to something you mentioned earlier. You were talking about the early use of mixnets and how the cypherpunks were using them. Can you kind of give us a little overview of like the historical use of mixnets?
Yeah. So cypherpunks, again, Tim May, Eric Hughes, all these people, they were like a group of essentially computer programmers in the 90s, and they were very inspired by David Chaum's work. They discovered it. It was academic. It was, to be honest, famous within academia, but obscure outside academia. And they said, wow, we can have anonymous messages. We don't need to have identity. We can have anonymous credentials. We don't need to prove our identity to anyone. We can just prove, that I'm a member of the cypherpunks group, or I'm over 18, or I'm American, or whatever. And they also were interested in digital cash. They said, well, can we make anonymous, censorship-resistant cash? So the cypherpunks were very into privacy, and they were inspired to a large extent by David Chaum's work. Now, David Chaum himself was not a cypherpunk or crypto anarchist. He's a bit more, I would say,
academic.
Academic, more traditional, but his work blew their collective minds. And they started a mailing list, and on that mailing list, they were just kind of, discussing. They would say, hey, could we build this? Could we build that? And you saw people build, this is before Tor for the most part, people built different anonymous messaging systems. Mm-hmm. For example, one of the ones that no one knows about, who I think is a reasonable suspect for Satoshi Nakamoto, is We Die. And he built this anonymous messaging system called PipeNet. And then he built a anonymous electronic currency called Bcash, right? And then other folks, Ben Laurie, who's very much against proof of work, he built a privacy enhanced cryptocurrency called Lucra. And Ben Laurie's actually, interestingly enough, was on the advisory board of WikiLeaks and is now hilariously working for Google, but also on Nym's advisory board.
Okay.
I would, so so we did. And then one of the more interesting characters set up something called the anonymous email service. Anonymous email service. It was set up by a Finnish fellow. I'm blanking on his name. I think it was began with H. And you would Helsingius, I think. You would. It was. I remember that the name of it was anon.pinnet.fi, Finland. And I want to send anonymous email. I would encrypt my email, send it to his email server. He would strip off the headers. He didn't know where it was coming from, and then resend it from his address. And then if you wanted to respond, you could respond. And he had like a little database of like which encryption keys matched which email the entry point. And that was pretty cool until someone leaked the Scientology secret text, right? This actually happened. Someone leaked the Zano or whatever, secret doctrine. And this is the 90s. The internet was quite new. And the Scientologists just sent like lawyers and they were like, okay, we're gonna put you in jail. And they really hammered that, what was called the cypherpunk email remailer. It's called a remailer because it takes in email and remails it.
That's
right?
fascinating.
And yes, things went totally crazy. He was like, oh, and he had to take his service down for a little bit. And this inspired another coder called Lynn Sassaman, along with his friends Lance Cottrell and others. He said, well, this is the problem. You don't want, you need more than encryption. You need more than PGP. Why don't we build a mixnet? This was the first code in mixnet. It had the great name Mixmaster.
Okay.
And Lynn Sassaman built Mixmaster. And it was used, and it was a mixnet. You would send email, and your email would just kind of wait there. It was encrypted with PGP. It would drop all the headers, but it was then mixed up with other people's email, which was also encrypted and then sent out. And so that was a Chaumian mix, effectively. And that worked, and people used it. But the problem that Mixmaster had was that there was no way to send a response. So this whole concept of a SERB and single-use reply block and the Sphinx packet format, this was invented by George Denises, who's also a Nym advisor.
Okay.
And he and Nick Mathewson, that went on to co-found Tor, they created a third cypherpunk email remailer, literally called Generation 3, called MixMinion. And that kind of pushed out around 2000, and that let people respond. And honestly, people were using it up until like 2012. I helped run a MixMinion server. The code wasn't updated since like 2005, but Italian journalists would use it to like escape the mob and stuff. It seemed to work pretty well. But the problem with it, again, it wasn't distributed. So all the mixing was just like happening, on an email server, and that's kind of dangerous. You take out the email server, and every once in a while, the police would like show up and they would like seize the email servers, and maybe they couldn't figure anything out, but then the service would go down, right?
Yeah.
And then so people said, well, but then all the energy in building anonymous communication systems from the cypherpunks, a lot of it went into Tor, which is reasonable. And Tor had this whole new model called onion routing. It did do mixing, but people thought mixing was kind of too slow and the internet wasn't fast enough for it anyways. And the real catcher with Nakamoto is, who is Nakamoto? And this is the most interesting fact that no one has really investigated. But I've discussed it with Adam Back, and it's like totally obvious. Lynn Sassaman did his PhD, and I don't think Lynn Sassaman's Nakamoto. I knew Lynn, and I doubt he's Nakamoto just because he would complain to me about the privacy of Bitcoin. And that we discussed Bitcoin a few times. But regardless, Lynn Sassaman was a cypherpunk. He lived in the Netherlands at Leuven, which is a university in Belgium, despite he was American. He knew all the peer-to-peer work because he was former roommates with Bran Cohen that went on to make BitTorrent. And, he was working on Mixmaster. He said, I'm going to do my PhDs in anonymous currency and mixnets. And his PhD advisor was Bart Purnell, also a Nym advisor, I might add, and David Chom, who invented mixnets, right? So he definitely knew about mixnets. He definitely knew about electronic currency. He was a total cypherpunk. And he basically had the insights that would make it very possible for him to be Nakamoto. And the central insight is this. The central insight is that a lot of people complain Bitcoin isn't anonymous, and it isn't anonymous in one really important regard, which is it's not anonymous except for this very weak notion of pseudonymous keys for money transfers. But weirdly enough, it is anonymous in the consensus protocol. Anyone can turn on their computer and mine Bitcoin, and you can join that consensus protocol. And that consensus protocol, basically, who has the most hash power, makes the most blocks, and the longest chain wins, and that becomes the block that everyone else follows. That's an awesome breakthrough that's not appreciated enough, because that allows people to join Bitcoin anonymously in a truly decentralized way. So, and the way that's done is via proof of work. And because I keep running this hash function, and I get this number of trailing zeros, and that trailing zeros, once I can prove that I've run the hash function enough, because I can replicate that trailing of zeros, because it's hard, right? It's hard to produce that magic number that wins the contest, but it's easy to verify. That concept of proof of work actually comes from mixnets. Adam Back was a mixnet guy, I think ran a mixnet service called the Freedom Network. And if I'm going to run a mixnet, one other problem you might have, besides Scientology knocking on your front door, one other large problem you're going to have is that, some guy's going to be like, hey, I'm a Nigerian prince. I'm going to send a gazillion emails from your server. I'm gonna overload your server with spam. And then the typical way you prevent spam is you have a list of spammers that identify them. This is actually how spam is identified today. That's why it's hard to use it with Gmail, because they say, oh, it's not on the list, it's spam. And these lists are maintained by centralized authorities like Spamhaus. And then historically in consensus protocols, it's also like, how do you get consensus? Well, you have a list of people. You say, well, these are the people that flipping the coin, and they become the leader, and they kind of make consensus. Or they vote. And it's really important to remember that this is ultimately a pretty amazing technique, but it's not anonymous, right? So what Nakamoto fitted together was, they said, well, look, I know about mixnets, I know about proof of work, but rather than use proof of work to prevent spam, I'm going to use proof of work as evidence that I can participate in Bitcoin mining and make it in this consensus protocol. So that's a real breakthrough. And it's not about the user being anonymous. It's about the important actors that maintain the blockchain being anonymous. And so therefore, we do know that Nakamoto must have known about mixnets. And I know Adam Back. I don't think Adam Back's Nakamoto. It would be cool if he was, but I'd be a bit doubtful.
I don't think so either. I've met him.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
And he just doesn't have the ideological, activist kind of hacktivist mind state that I think Satoshi had. Satoshi tried to create a really disruptive technology because he had an ideological belief system, and I don't see that in Adam Back, to be honest.
But Lynn Sassaman, and Adam also just denies being Nakamoto, but Lynn Sassaman definitely had that background. I mean, he definitely identified as kind of anarchist hacker. He had the right set of skills. He knew, he was on the cypherpunks mailing list, knew about mixnets, built a mixnet, knew about proof of work, and was interested in building anonymous digital cash. I'm like, okay, cool. The guy had all the right skill sets. I don't think it's him, because he did, unless he was incredibly good at hiding it, he complained a bit too much about privacy on Bitcoin, and not just a little bit, but a lot. So I suspect that he was like, oh, that was such a bad decision, not having more privacy on Bitcoin. They should have used, X, Y, Z. I was like, well, if you were Nakamoto, you probably would have built that in a bit. That being said, there's a fair amount of evidence, the writing style looks similar. The coding style is actually kind of similar. But yeah, you never know. Maybe he was just profoundly good at hiding it, being very, very self-critical. Still friends with his wife, and everyone's like, oh, if you can just give us that box of hard drives, maybe there's 1 billion Bitcoin on it. And she's like, well, they're all encrypted, I don't have the password. So but it could, I do think that, and another reason why Nakamoto probably knew about mixnets is because it seemed like he used them to hide his identity. So when you send an email, it has an IP address on it, right? I mean, that's captured in the metadata of the email. And Nakamoto did a very good job hiding his IP address tracks. And so he had the right set of skills. And we think that, I would guess that had Nakamoto again, the cypherpunk ideology is not just electronic cash, not just private and electronic cash. It's really all three. It's what I call the holy trinity. It's anonymous credentials. So I don't want to have a centralized identity system, which you're seeing like a lot of countries push, but I don't even want like a decentralized identity system that doesn't preserve my privacy.
Mm-hmm.
And David Chom had this great paper called I think it was called it's called Making Big Brother Obsolete, like something like secure transactions without identity, where he says, well, look, we can use the same technology, same cryptography, like blind signatures and stuff, to build anonymous credential systems. And we can combine these with mixnets, so we have anonymous communication. And then you combine this with anonymous money, and then you really, you don't need states anymore. You don't need centralized authorities. You really built and that was the main thing that Timothy May realized in the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto. He's like, now we can build a whole new kind of economy around this anonymous technology. And even David Chom, I think, didn't have that kind of political ideology, but like the cypherpunks definitely did. And I do think that Nakamoto shared that ideology. I think he'd be to be honest, probably slightly unhappy over what's going on with Bitcoin right now with all of the ETFs and
oh yeah, I think so too.
Adoption.
Yeah, I totally think that. The fact that like the Bitcoin core developers dropped the ball on adding privacy when it was clearly intended to be added at some point to Bitcoin, like has left it with such a regulatory attack surface that I feel like it's been totally co-opted now. Like that's why I'm more interested in like Monero and privacy coins and stuff. And that's why I'm interested in Nym as well, is because like communication, as you said, is a very important component, and having anonymous communication is very, very important for having freedom online. So like I guess like with the mixnets that were preceding Nym, like how did you guys build upon that and like improve it? Like what have you guys done to kind of like take the technology further?
Well, there's a fundamental breakthrough, which was done by Anya Petrowska, along with George Denises and a few other folks, where they radically changed the design of mixnets. So the problem with mixnets, it has this what we call batch and forward technique. So I get all these packets, God knows from who,
Yeah,
completely anonymous. I mix them up and I release them. And that looks really good on paper, but welcome to the real internet. And the real internet, you do not receive all the packets. You cannot release, packets get dropped, packets come in at different times, packets get delayed, and then you can't release them all at once, right? And so there's a different kind of mixnet design called so it's like a batch and go mixnet, or what you call discrete time mixnet, is it's fine for things that can be really slow, like maybe like voting. You can actually use mixnets to vote anonymously, or maybe even email makes sense. But if you wanted to like put actual chaotic internet traffic through it, it's better for it to be what's called continuous time. And continuous time means I can receive a message at any time, and I delay it. And I delay it some random amount of time, and other messages come in. They come in whenever they want.
Mm.
And then I delay those messages too. They get delayed a random amount of time. And and that actually produces the same effect as mixing messages together if you got them all in one and then releasing them all at the same time. And then you can release the messages at different times, but they're still not released in the same order they came in, because remember, each message is randomly delayed a different amount of time. So like I get one message in, it's delayed, let's say 30 seconds. Another message it comes in afterwards, let's say 5 seconds after, if it's delayed 10 seconds, that second message comes out first. And it actually has the same kind of mathematical property of delinking your messages. It's not released in the same order, but it's a much more flexible model. And so it can work on like real internet traffic that's very chaotic. Now, of course, the question is, what happens if a message is dropped? And then you just use you send back, kind of anonymous acknowledgments. You say, okay, and you see this when you're using the mixnet, you'll send messages to you like, why is it so slow? Why is it so slow? Some of those mixnets will be dropping your packets. Your packets are routed through an entry server, an exit server, and 3 different mixnets in between, because that provides the maximum kind of privacy bang for your buck, according to our simulations. Okay. And so what that means is that you go to one computer, you go to second, it's delayed. You go to the third, it's delayed. A third, it's delayed. Then it's released. and at each step, also you can add fake packets, right? So those fake packets kind of increase the amount of anonymity because you don't know, and the adversary doesn't know, whoever's watching, she doesn't know which order the packet, if it's a fake packet or real packet, and the orders all change. So you can immediately see it's much harder. While in a normal VPN or Tor or a normal peer-to-peer network, to be honest, it's first in, first out. So you just say, okay, first message in, that's gonna be the first message out. And yeah, that's a little bit faster, but it's really terrible for privacy. And so that's called a continuous time mixnet. The paper is called Loopix, and we build upon that concept. And I could actually, would you be interested in the payment system? Because if you're interested in private money, we did a kind of interesting payment system.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier this like anonymous credential phenomenon, right? So I said, well, imagine you could prove something anonymously, and it's sort of like a zero knowledge proof, but to be frank, it's a bit more low. It's different cryptography. It's much simpler. It's just like you take a curve point and you just run it to another exponent, and then it's blinded effectively. So what we do is when you pay, we're VPN and we'd like to be paid because when you use the VPN, you want some of that payment to get distributed back to the mix nodes that are mixing that traffic, right? Because otherwise, like, the system's not economically sustainable. And we just saw, like, a few days ago, Trump cut open technology funds, right? So that probably, if you're dependent on U.S. government funds to build an anonymous communication system, good luck right now. It's pretty bad. I mean, I assume there's been cuts to Tor, cuts to all sorts of folks because of these government cuts. So we want to build a system that had no dependency on external funding.
Okay.
So when you pay, but then when you pay, we don't want to connect that payment to your usage of the mixnet. So how do you do that? Here's how we do it. You pay, and you can pay via Bitcoin, you can pay via credit cards, but most importantly, you can also pay via Monero. It's actually all we support right now. And then when you pay, just, if you're running a credit card, it's going to go to Stripe, not particularly privacy supporting, but it is what it is. That's the only way to really process credit cards nowadays. You pay with Bitcoin, and Monero, it goes to a BTC Pay server that we run. But when we get that payment, we then send you back an anonymous credential, which we call ZK Nym. So it's like a voucher. It's a voucher that says, yo, you paid for this. And then when you want to talk to the mixnet, you don't talk to us. You never have to talk to us again. You have a credential, like a ticket in a ticket book, that proves that you paid for so much bandwidth over so much time and so many months. And you just show that to, like, the mixnet, and the mixnet say, cool, look, I know you paid. And it lets you in. And because that payment anonymous credential is unlinkable, when you get it, you can re-randomize it, and, like, the bytes are just different. I cannot link, even if they, like, arrest our entire company, put everyone in jail, get all the payment databases, Stripe hands everything over, they look in the Monero chain, they look in the Bitcoin blockchain, you still cannot reasonably connect those two phenomena. And I think that's a nice feature in them. It's one of our, I think, more interesting features that we spent a lot of time building this anonymous payment system. That being said, it's better to use anonymous currency to begin with. And Monero is the only currency that has privacy by default. And when we first started the mixnet, we had people that want to use with Monero. And so people set up these gateways that all they didn't do like general person. They just say, okay, you want to send a Monero transaction, you can send it through our transaction, and you would download Monero desktop, and you would, like, in Monero desktop, you have this, like, you can go to, like, advanced settings and then point it, and you can turn on Tor and point it at Tor.
Yeah.
So you can do the exact same thing with Nym today. You can download Monero desktop, get the Monero address. It's somewhere on the internet for, I think it's even on our website somewhere, for I want to send Monero over Nym. And you can just send Monero over Nym using Monero desktop right now. And it's totally free. And we just encourage people to use that service because it's cool.
So instead of like 9050, it's just running out of a different port, like on your computer?
Yeah, it's just running on whatever. It's just like Tor runs out of, I forget what port, but, like, Nym typically runs off their 1789, if I remember correctly, which is the port,
I think Monero on Tor is like 1889 maybe, or maybe that's.
Yeah, I mean, you can change the port as well. I think but literally you can just cut and paste our port in. The port numbers are kind of arbitrary.
Yeah.
You just got to tell Monero, hey,
So
Monero uses this proxy software called SOC4. Hey, Monero, ship this. Don't ship it to Tor. Don't ship it to the internet. Ship it to Nym, and then Nym will broadcast that packet out to the Monero network. So that gives you an additional layer of privacy.
That's
And
awesome.
then if you want to use Nym VPN, you want to pay for it, you can just pay Monero, and that's totally cool. Works out of the box. Works today. I saw. I don't know. Of course, most people that use Monero do not want to be known, but Seth, for privacy, said, "Hey, it works." So I beta tested it, but he got it working on mainnet, and that's pretty cool.
Okay, cool. Yeah, in like 2 weeks when my Mulvad runs out, I think I'm going to switch to Nym and try it out.
Give it a shot. I mean, we're gonna give. I mean, don't Mulvad. I'll be very honest. I'm friends with the founder of Mulvad. He's an awesome guy. It is a centralized service, though.
Yeah.
And so this is a decentralized service. It will be a little slower. I'm not going to lie to you. And that's just the price you pay for decentralization. But I think it's usable. And we will have free passes. You can try it for free and see, like, hey, this is too slow for me, or, I'm willing to bite that bullet. And we also remember you can always just send your Monero over Nym for free. We don't charge for that. However, it's nice if you do pay for the Nym VPN, because that money then subsidizes the whole network, and that lets us keep things like the Monero service open for free.
Amazing.
Actually,
I tried to use it.
Random guy we don't know runs it, but it lets us basically not charge for that traffic.
Okay. Last time I talked to you, I tried to use Nym, and I run Linux. I run Fedora Linux, and I downloaded like the RPM, and for whatever reason, it didn't work on my system. Like, it gave me an error, and then I kind of forgot about it up until like I started reaching out to you to arrange this podcast. So I will definitely give it another try as soon as my credit runs out.
I mean, if you were downloading it before.
Yeah, it was before like the app launched and all that.
I mean, the app tries to make it a much smoother install process. I actually don't. I mean, I think we definitely have debs. We should have RPMs. I'm not sure if the RPMs are up to date or not. If they're not up to date, just file a support request or hit us up in Telegram. We have a guy whose whole job is make sure the packages work. So he should figure that out for you if the packages are out of date. And then if you download Nym and you're not using the VPN, you can still use Nym, but it's kind of like running. So if you run Tor, you can run the Tor browser, right? That's awesome. You can also run this thing called Tor D, the Tor daemon. Mm-hmm. So if I want to just like use Monero with Tor, I typically get Tor D working. Yeah. And then I point Monero at Tor, and you can still use, you have Nym D, and that just is like essentially the Nym equivalent, the Nym daemon. And that daemon is a little bit more funky on the install, but people have got it working. So just reach out as well. We answer questions both on NimD and Tor D.
So if I run my Monero node over Nym, like what advantages does that give me, like compared to running it over Tor?
Well, I would say you got to be careful, right? So what do you mean by running a node? So if I'm sending Monero transaction, I would recommend sending the Monero transaction over Nym rather than Tor. And this is a very simple reason for that, which is that when you're anonymous on Tor, you actually use the same entry exits for every 10 minutes. They rotate, which is not bad. But if I send two transactions, or I use Tor like for something else, like let's say I'm also browsing the Tor browser and I use, let's say, Electrum, or I use my Monero desktop, that all that traffic is easily correlatable because it's all running through the same circuit.
Okay.
Mixnets are what you call message-based. So each packet goes to a different path. So that means by default, your web browser traffic is going to choose. That's why
you can't correlate.
Slow. Yeah. It's not correlatable as easily. I mean, you could do all deep learning on it. And we're running experiments now, being like, imagine, we have a new paper coming out a month where we say, imagine worst case scenario, the man controls both the entry and exits. How much can they learn? And then what can we use to defeat that? And we do some head-on comparisons to Tor. So we have a bunch of papers and drafts, and we basically, the short version is you got to be careful. You want to switch your nodes just like Tor, and try not to let use two different nodes in two different jurisdictions. Helps a lot. That being said, you should just be able to send your transactions over Nym quite easily. Now, running a Monero node over Nym might be a bit more difficult. That's actually interesting. I don't know if anyone's tried to do that. And the reason is you have to kind of be listening to the Monero peer-to-peer broadcast transactions. So you would have to set up something, which I know people have done with, actually, weirdly enough, Cosmos and other So I'm sure it's possible in there. I just don't know if anyone's done it. The ideal setup is you would have like a listening port running over Nym, and then like a broadcast port, and then you would basically listen anonymously, take those transactions in, and then broadcast them anonymously. Now, the problem here is I'm a user, I'm using Monero, I want extra privacy, I'm happy to wait an additional 10 seconds. I mean,
Yeah.
No big deal here. But if I'm running a full node on Monero and I want those kind of mining rewards effectively, you might not be able to get them as easily because you might have 10 seconds or more in between picking up the transaction and shooting them out. So it's going to add considerable overhead to running your node. That doesn't matter with some software, right? If I'm running anonymous Dropbox, whatever, who cares? I'd rather be anonymous because I don't get a financial reward for speed. But in systems where there's a financial reward for speed, if you're just broadcasting stuff, you're just running a full node. I think it would be awesome to run a Monero full node over Nym. I think if you're running like effectively a miner, you might not get as many rewards as you would without Nym, but then you'll be more private, and that's a trade-off people could take. It'd be an interesting, definitely an interesting R&D project. I think our devs would be happy to look at that and think about it with you as well if you want to chat with folks about it.
Yeah, maybe I'll drop in your Telegram and start chatting with you guys.
I have just, I have definitely used Nym to send Monero. I don't run a Monero full node because I'm just too busy with Nym.
Yeah, no, I understand that completely. So I guess like with the nodes, you said that there's people running them, but then there's also, you expect companies to step in and run them because there's a financial component to running a Nym node, which could reward you, right?
Not just companies, everyone gets rewarded.
Okay. Like, is it feasible for someone like me that just uses the VPN to run a node and stake?
Yeah. If you have a server, just, I mean, it depends. If you're running a Monero full node server, you have the sysadmin skills, the computing skills to set up a Nym gateway or Nym mixnet, and then you'll get some amount of rewards. Yeah. So if you let's say you want to run a Nym node, and the thing is everyone gets rewarded, and we don't know who you are. So it's not just companies, but individuals also get rewarded. We have no idea if it's company or individual or who it is behind the node. That being said, two important things to remember. One is the Nym token is not a privacy coin. It's transparent. And the reason it's transparent is because the more bytes you mix, the more packets you mix, you get a higher reputation. That reputation we want the reputation to be transparent so users can be like, oh, this is a high reputation node.
Mm.
And now there's also a question of like, what is preventing the NSA from just like spinning up 50,000 nodes and throwing them at our system, right?
Yeah.
And what's preventing that is we use staking, not staking as in proof of stake, but a mechanism where we force you to basically have a pledge in Nym nodes. And if you don't have that pledge, you can't join the system. The pledge is quite low. I think it's like $1 right now. Nym nodes, but it's more than free. So it prevents certain kinds of Sybil attacks. We did get one Sybil attack early on, and this prevented it. And the other thing is that people can, if I don't want to run a node, but I have a friend that runs a node, I may want to buy a bunch of Nym, and then I kind of stake it to him that I get some proceedings from that.
So like I could delegate my tokens to your node and I'll still get a little.
You get a cut. And people can determine how much of a cut they want to give and so forth. But the main thing is that shows that you trust that node. And so what we like nodes that we select nodes, what's called the active set, the amount of mixed nodes and gateways that are active at any moment. They get selected by the amount of stake they have and their performance, how many packets they're mixing. And effectively, if you don't have enough stake, you will make some money running a Nym node, but very little because your chances of being selected go down. But if you have a lot of stake, it goes up quite high. And so what happens is in Nym, we say, okay, we encourage people to stake to people they know, people they trust. So, some, awesome, for example, I mean, what's the group? And so, Doctors Without Frontiers is set up a node. People they're like, hi, we're Doctors Without Frontiers. It's on our webpage. We run this Nym node. We get this proceedings from it. And then people say, okay, cool. I like Doctors Without Frontiers. I'm going to stake my Nym tokens on that node. And that's pretty cool. And we think that's really interesting insofar as that we actually, through that staking, we can determine who trusts who. And governments, particularly if they're trying to be undercover, they don't know, they only trust each other. It's very unlikely the NSA can just like come on in and they could maybe buy a bunch of stake, but then they would probably delegate it to themselves, and that would be immediately detectable because we can see on the chain who's delegating to who, basically. And we think that's actually useful. It's a civil defense mechanism. And we do get occasionally attacked that people say, okay, well, is this like a shitcoin? What's going on here? And we basically want to say, look, mixnet reputation systems have existed since the 90s, right?
Okay.
They predate Bitcoin. They predate Monero. They were worked on by the cypherpunks. Literally, the inventors of Tor were making a mixnet reputation system. They had a startup called Reputation Technologies, and they couldn't figure it out. And they gave up at some point. That's why they made Tor on U.S. government funding, because there's no way to get this incentive system working right. But then, from Bitcoin, from Monero, from all the R&D around blockchains in general, we've learned a lot about incentive structure. So we just revisited that topic. We said, actually, we don't want Nym tokens to be used as a replacement dollar. We don't want to be used we don't want it to be used as a store of value like Bitcoin. We don't want it to be used as private digital cash, which is kind of like the Monero use case. It's really a mixnet reputation system, and its value basically signifies how many people want to use the mixnet. So if more people want to use the mixnet, there's not enough mix nodes, the price goes up, and then people, need to buy, because people say, oh, there's a lot of money coming in the system. Why don't I buy some Nym and get into that value flow? And we think that's actually a pretty awesome technique. So even like old school cypherpunks who are historically against everything but Bitcoin, everything but Monero, they kind of usually they say, okay, actually this does make sense. It's a pretty useful use of a reputation token. And so that's why we launched the token. We know it's controversial, but then if you look at the mixnets without tokens, without reputation systems, no one uses them. Like they have no usage. They have literally no usage. So if you look at others, there's like the old system we abandoned called Cats Impose. It's not deployed. You could maybe deploy it in a centralized fashion, but if you want a decentralized mixnet, you have to have something to keep the damn nodes running. Now, we could do profit sharing in Monero directly, or profit sharing in Bitcoin, and we do want to enable that. So people say, I don't want to think about the Nym token. I just want to set up a node. I just want to see Monero. That's fine. We are looking at that. But again, it's just more coding work to make that easy to happen.
Okay. And then like with the Nym token, I guess like I'm going to ask you this because my friend Boya Kasha, he's a Brazilian Bitcoin guy. He wanted me to ask, like, why do you need the Nym token? I know you just mentioned that it's a reputation system, but like, if you guys move to Monero, like, will the Nym token become obsolete? Or like, if you move to Bitcoin profit sharing?
You can still do profit sharing Monero, and we're happy to enable that for people.
Yeah.
But you will still need in the background a reputation system, right? Because what we don't want is we don't want some Monero whale to come in and be like, here's a bunch of Monero. Now all the traffic goes to my node. That's like an attack, right? NSA can just buy tons of Monero to set up a big node and get all the traffic skewed. We need some way to keep track of the performance of nodes, and that will and should, I think, continue to be denominated Nym token.
Okay.
Now,
so even if you guys,
we're more than happy to, people don't want the Nym token, cool. You can get Monero to pay your bills, or Bitcoin, or I'd be a bit credit card transactions. The unknown third parties are pretty hard, but I think that we have options there. But there needs to be a reputation system, because otherwise, how do you reward the traffic? You can reward traffic via profit sharing, but then you have to keep track of who gets it. How do you divide up those rewards?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look, we thought about this problem 3 years ago, and we thought about it for a very long time, or 4 years ago now, getting older. If you find via your favorite search engine reward sharing for mixnets, that goes through the whole logic of how the system works. And then we do these. If we had a different system, we couldn't. Like, we basically can prove that the system encourages honest behavior by the mix nodes. That mix nodes should not be malicious. They shouldn't drop packets. Like, they should do the thing they're doing, and it should be hard to break the unlinkability. And that's shown via achieving in our paper what's called a Nash equilibrium, which basically says, okay, like it's in everyone's favor not to screw everyone else.
So
And we
running a
couldn't do
node, like
that if
how
we
much
had, like, a
resources?
random other currency running the system, and we had no reputation system.
How much resources does it take to run a node? Like, can I run one like on a
Pages.
old computer, or do you need like high performance
It's
hardware?
not really the computer, it's really the bandwidth, right? So
Okay,
let's say, I used to live in Lebanon, and in Lebanon, bandwidth is very expensive. It is just financially crazy to run a mixed node
in
in,
Lebanon.
in Lebanon. It's different. It's a very different system than like Monero or Bitcoin. You don't need a huge hard drive to copy a chain. You just
Mhm.
need enough bandwidth. You need bandwidth that has reliable, that's like up, that's like, not going down off and on all the time. So that does unfortunately put a lot of developing countries out in the mix. Uh, and you need that bandwidth should be cheap enough that you can pay for it using your Nym mixnet rewards. And we have simulators that kind of give you answers there, and we're going to make them better and better over time. So you can run it on an old computer if you have like a good Ethernet connection. But what you should not do is like run it on an old computer over like Wi-Fi or something. Like that
Okay.
would be a bit crazy. But you don't need a big hard drive. I mean, you make reasonably. I do think there's an impact on like the number of cores you have, because the cores, the cryptographic processing, Nym is very crypto heavy compared to Tor. Again, we're like, you take these packets, you decrypt them, you re-encrypt them, you're taking them to exponents. It's like a lot of Diffie-Hellmans effectively, and soon post-quantum chems. And so it's not something that's dependent on your hard drive. It's almost the reverse of a tradition. It's really dependent on your, maybe the speed of your processor. If you can hold everything in RAM, that's good. But again, you don't have to hold the whole blockchain in RAM. You just need to hold the packets you're shipping in RAM. And can you? But the main thing is your bandwidth. So if you have if you're like a sysadmin and you have access to like bare metal servers on like fucking T1 line, then yeah, you're in the money. You can just put some old server there, you'll probably be totally okay. It depends on the bandwidth of your connection and its kind of throughput. So if I have a bare metal server on a T1 line, that'd be great. It can be a pretty old server. It doesn't need a big hard drive. But if I'm running on like my Wi-Fi, or I have like a bad cable subscription, I think on normal cable you can run it. But the problem with a lot of providers is they'll like, in order to prevent file sharing, they'll like throttle you must know this if you run a full node. They throttle your kind of upstream traffic and don't throttle your downstream traffic.
Mhm.
But if you can run like a Monero node, Monero nodes obviously have both upstream and downstream traffic, and I think that the same server that runs Monero node, that bandwidth probably is sufficient to run a mixed node. I don't know how tight the competition for bandwidth is. We are taking advantage of the same evolutionary process, so we do want people to be able to run it on like normal machines. That being said, like as more money comes in the system, you make more depending on your quality of service, which depends on your bandwidth and probably to a lesser extent your core number of cores. So we imagine that as competition gets tighter, like we want to have incentives to like build like faster machines that do faster cryptographic processing and get faster like T1 connections.
One of my last questions will be like, how did you initially get into like this whole privacy research thing?
Well, I have always been involved in in privacy research. But I was more, when I was a younger person, I was actually more interested in AI. I was very interested in the big AI vision. And the big AI vision, like the vision of creating AI, or is it even possible to create AI, really motivated me. And that's what made me kind of interested in privacy, because I noticed when I was building some of these early AI systems, so I did language models before they were large language models. They were just called language models back then. I realized that very little data could infer a lot about someone, right? So I could, for example, I could just look at what you're doing in a mall. I could uniquely identify you just from like your Bluetooth data. And that's when I started getting worried about privacy. Then I got like really worried about privacy because, to be honest, I am a big, I think the biggest existential threat facing humanity is climate change. I don't believe in all of this, blaming ordinary people for it. It's just the fact of the matter. All this CBDC greenwashing stuff is absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion. But at the same point, it is also true, the weather is going to get crazier, and we're going to have crop failures and probably social failures of large scale nation states and social systems. I realized this 10 years ago. I got involved in protest, also in protest against the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, because I was against the kind of global financial system and neoliberal capital. And then what happened is, I actually had a personal police officer assigned to me undercover, and they did a lot of analysis on me. They used that analysis to arrest me at a climate change protest in Copenhagen, 2009. And then I got very interested in privacy. I said, well, gee, if they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd always been like friends with the Tor developers, and I'd always supported their work. And I said, but when I started, particularly after Snowden, Snowden sort of revealed the capacities of the NSA, which were actually a bit high, quite a bit higher than we suspected, particularly in terms of they could just capture all the data and exploit everything. And they would just, even if it's encrypted, they would just copy it and to exploit later. And the NSA did not have magical cryptographic tricks to break cryptography. What they had was data centers. They had huge data centers and the ability to do massive data processing. So I said, okay, I was friends with George Denisis, one of the early mixnet designers, and we got together and we put a funding proposal together, because I was an academic at the time, to build a new kind of mixnet that we said was going to be resistant even to NSA mass surveillance. And we got funding from the European Commission. The funding is no strings attached. So it's all open source, produce the research papers, but we weren't trying to get ordinary people to use it. We were just trying to see, is it possible? And we thought maybe, governments would be interested in using this stuff. But the thing is, of course, the EU governments, they're completely cut to Microsoft. So, you produce this thing which can resist NSA mass surveillance. Here's this mixnet, it's the world's first industrial mixnet. And the European governments, sorry guys, you have Microsoft contracts for their VPN, or Cisco contracts. And, those contracts, we know those systems are backdoored. It's well known. It's even in Snowden revelations. But what can you do? And so we were like, well, we would like to continue this research. We now, screw governments. We want to put this in the hands of ordinary people. But in order to do that, we needed to hire more developers. It had to move out of like proof of concept, like something you could download and put in the app store, so forth and so on. And then that's why we found a Nym. We found a Nym in order to bring this kind of research and improve it and bring it into people's hands. And, I was inspired. I mean, for cryptocurrency, I think, what inspired me, I knew Adam back. I was a bit shocked when he started raising money for Blockstream. I was like, wow, Adam's raising money. Something's up. And then, my friend Amir, he came back from Syria, was crashing on my couch, and he started getting me interested in cryptocurrency again. And then at some point, I wasn't even really particularly interested in fundraising to build a mixnet. But then it's a hilarious story. I was at an academic crypto conference called Real World Cryptography. It's a very good conference. And I was trying to push getting this software used. And I was actually demoing it to the Signal team. This is 2000, I think, 18 maybe, 2018. And, I had one too many drinks, and I closed my laptop, turned off, but then left my bag at the bar. Luckily, it was in Switzerland, so I went back to get the bag, and it was still there. Remarkable. Switzerland's a very nice and safe place. I mean, I was concerned I got backdoors. I stopped using that laptop. I just didn't want to leave it around. But then I got stuck overnight in Switzerland, and a friend of mine invited me to a conference. Ashley Tyson, who was friends with, I think worked on Defense Distributed with Cody Wilson, and worked with Amir and stuff. And that's how I met her. And then I went to a bar with her, and in the bar there was a guy who was like an early, I think, Kraken investor.
Okay.
And he was an old cypherpunk. And he just basically said, hey, you should really build this. I'll make sure you get your first check. I'll work on this with you, because I didn't know any of these people really in the cryptocurrency space. The only person, to be frank, that I think I knew was Adam Back, hilariously enough. And then my other friends, like Len Sassaman, who killed himself, and so I didn't actually know that many cryptocurrency people, and Amir, of course. And then we worked it out. We found a Nym. We did our fundraising round, and most cryptocurrency projects, they do a bunch of funding, they produce some garbage software and they leave. And we did a bunch of funding and we produced a working mixnet. So I'm quite proud of the team. It's actually I think it's a world historical moment for the cypherpunk movement and for crypto anarchists everywhere that we have produced the world's first scalable working anonymous communication network that's based on mixnets, that's resistant to really powerful global adversaries that can monitor the whole network.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing achievement to be sure. It's just kind of crazy to me that you were like gravitating around all these like cypherpunk people that were like participating in the crypto world, but you weren't really involved in the crypto world. That's just
yeah.
wild.
I was building crypto APIs,
yeah.
right? So I was working on, my whole goal was to deploy strong cryptography to as many people as possible. So I did that via web standards. I was like, hey Apple, hey Firefox, hey Google, because at that point in time, people forget, even in 2014, there was no way to even use cryptography in JavaScript. People were hacking it together and it was all broken. So my main focus at that point was web browsers, but I just got really sick. I was interested in mixnets. We're doing mixnet R&D, but I got really sick of having to appeal to these centralized platforms. We wanted to give strong crypto to people, but it just seemed like you had to basically beg Google to install a new feature in Chrome. And that to me was not very fulfilling. It seemed very slow, dependent on possibly hostile third parties. I was there when the first, I got my Bitcoin just to play with. I wish I got more. I think Amir gave me my first one, maybe. I don't remember. It was around that time I first met him in 2012. So I've been tracking the space, but the problem is I was like, oh, well, the privacy of Bitcoin's bad, so I'm not going to use it, which is, that was honestly what I thought, which was a sentiment shared by, my friends like Len Sassaman and, Bin Laurie and other people. And then we, to be frank, we weren't really aware of Monero. Monero was still a bit more underground. So I was only kind of aware of things that went through the Cypherpunks mailing list and that my friends talked about.
Yeah.
And so I kind of missed the Monero train. I'm kicking myself for that. But yeah, we go to MoneroCon every year. We'll probably go this year. We sponsor it historically in Prague. And so we will continue to support the Monero community. That being said, we're open. And I would say that, if someone's like, hey, I have this other privacy enhanced thing, as long as it's not a scam, we'll enable that for payments. I mean, we're not.
Yeah. Is there other coins that offer privacy that you see as valuable besides Monero?
Yeah, I'm not. Zcash has approached us, and the problem with Zcash is they have a very different system than Monero. So it's, again, you have the shielded transparency duality. I'm not a big fan of that because it's confusing. Is my transaction private or not? It should just always be private by default. But then, Zuko is an old cypherpunk, and Zuko, the Zcash team approached us could we enable Nym? So they saw that Nym worked with Monero, and they're like, can we enable Zcash transactions with Nym? I looked at their wallets. I was like, no, you can't, because you're not using standard proxies. You're using this crazy RPC system. So and they're using Go, and we're using Rust, and it was a bunch of work. We did get it's not integrated, but we do have a bunch of Zcash enabled Nym libraries, but we don't take Zcash to pay for Nym VPN. And there's a very simple reason for that, which is that Monero has excellent BTC pay server support. And we've asked the Zcash community, like, hey, how is it I can run my own? I'm a merchant. I want to use shielded Zcash and only shielded Zcash to pay for stuff. And there's just no way to do it right now. So hopefully the Zcash community figures that out. I haven't looked. Some of my friends have been hyping Zano. I haven't looked at Zano at all. Aztec, which had a kind of privacy enhanced Ethereum L2, at some point they built, without even telling us, a Nym ability to access that using Nym. But then I think after the Tornado Cash sanctions, they were like, oh, they shut that service down. And there's no default privacy on Ethereum. People have talked about it, but we're not seeing much progress there. There's a few other projects I'm following. I'm not a big investor because, to be honest, we put all the code not to line my pockets. I haven't sold a single Nym, and I haven't, I've just made a normal salary off of this. We have, I don't really do investment, nor would I give investment advice. I just track projects I know, and if I'm lucky, I get a bit of it. We have, of course, we're very excited by DarkFi. DarkFi is enabling Nym. There was a minor issue with some of the I/O, but we're fixing that. And we're watching Midnight Network is kind of interesting. It seems to be the main kind of privacy enhanced smart contract bet. It's similar to Aleo, but we haven't really, we haven't integrated against any of these privacy enhanced smart contract platforms. I haven't really had time to do due diligence on them. I am very excited by the Monero community. One thing which I was going to say, which I like about the Monero community, is they seem to be willing to upgrade their core protocol.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a huge advantage, because the thing with privacy, including Nym, is like we are constantly trying to make the system better. This involves like how much mixing there should be, how much cover traffic, and you have to have this kind of agile mindset. So you're just like, hey, this is the perfect privacy method. There is no perfect privacy method, but if you claim there is and you ossify it, that's very dangerous. So I think the Monero community has an inbuilt advantage based on based on privacy by default. I do think Zcash will eventually go that way, but also having a very agile development process. And so I've been following some of the Monero upgrades. They seem like they've been pulled off pretty well. And things like attacks and the ring signature system are becoming harder and harder. And eventually I was very excited by, I don't know if it actually went into the code base or not, but the Lalantis paper was pretty nice. We've been trying to track, we do see continual improvements to the underlying Monero protocol, and that gives me a lot of faith in the project's ability to succeed. And also the fact that, it got delisted and it survived, and not only survived, but prospered. And that means that, there's real demand for Monero. And that is, I think, also not the case for most other projects.
What do you think it's going to take to get, this is my last question, by the way, what do you think it's going to take to get like the public to become privacy conscious and take advantage of technologies like Nym and Monero?
I mean, I'll be very blunt. I think it's going to take the rise of authoritarianism and warfare. So when it comes to the point that, it comes to the point where when you're transacting, and then either, you start getting anything, you start getting agents knocking at your door saying, why did you buy this? Why are you buying this? Why are you trading? Maybe let's say trading with China is made illegal. Why are you trading with China? And they want to take away your right to transact freely. We saw this even with the truckers protest in Canada around COVID.
Yeah,
we've seen this with a number of other cases. People are going to freak out, and that will make them change the privacy enhancing technologies. And same with increasing censorship, right? So we're seeing, in Turkey, there's these big protests, government turns off the internet, huge rush towards VPNs. And so as you see increasingly authoritarian measures used across the board, it's just going to get worse and worse. That is absolutely dangerous. And people will realize it's dangerous, and then they're going to be forced to adopt these technologies. But what you don't want to be is, you want to be in the situation of, I was, following very closely. I have a lot of friends in Egypt and Syria when Arab Spring happened. You don't want to be in the situation of Arab Spring. So this is literally what happened to a friend of mine. There's a big bunch of protests. You want to communicate securely. You want to use the internet securely. Man, in 2011, like, people didn't have Signal. They were using Skype, right? But Skype, people are like, oh, it's peer-to-peer. But lo and behold, actually, it's ran by centralized company, Microsoft. There was a backdoor into Skype. Everyone goes to jail and gets arrested and tortured in prison. And so now, that was a big wake-up call. And so but at the time, people say, well, what do you have? And, like, to be honest, there wasn't that many good options. So you have to build the software before the authoritarian crackdowns start.
Yeah.
And authoritarian crackdowns will be accelerated by war, because let's say, I'm in Switzerland. The chances of Switzerland having an authoritarian government, I think, are pretty close to zero. It's got a very strong, directly democratic tradition, which I'm very, very happy. All the anarchists used to hang out in the Swiss mountains, in the Jura, since the 1800s, right? People get kicked out of France, show up in Switzerland. This was a traditional thing to do. Yeah. However, Switzerland's like, we're sitting on these glaciers. We're sitting on most of Europe's fresh water. So in the Switzerland, they're wargaming What if France invades us? What if Germany invades us? What if Italy? We don't have an air force, right? So what if they invade us and then the invader takes away your right to communicate privacy? Takes, all of a sudden you're the resistance. You're facing the invaders.
Mm-hmm.
My friend in Syria that got killed, he was a computer programmer. And when all hell broke loose, he actually ended up, organizing protests, running medical supplies, injured people. All of a sudden your job description changes because you're fighting for your life and your family's life.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the world will hold in the future, but I can guarantee it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better anytime soon. I am serene in the long term. I believe young people are technologically aware. Young people support freedom. Young people kind of understand the freedom to transact. Young people, I think, actually understand privacy. But, push comes to shove, they're not going to inherit power for a while now. We're going to have 10 to 20 years of chaos. And that's why we're building the software now, so it's ready when the chaos hits. And then I believe, I'm not going to tell people what to believe. I'm not going to tell people what to do. I believe in the right to privacy. You have the right to private beliefs, and you can act on those beliefs without me knowing. But I do believe generically across the board, young people are going to, inherit a world in a situation of crisis, and they're going to use anonymous technologies to resist authoritarianism and to rebuild a new world from the ashes of the old. And that's exactly what Nym will not help with entirely, but we will provide we will do our part. And lots of other technologies are needed. You need to really have a full stack. You will need privacy enhancing. You will need Monero. You will need open source Wi-Fi networks that can survive internet cuts. You will need stuff like LoRa and Meshtastic. You will need open source drones. You will need, you're going to need all of this. You're going to need things that we can't even imagine right now. But I do know what we can build. I do know what we contribute. And the nice thing about Nym, I'm just going to end on this note. The more people that, if you only have one person using anonymous communication network, you're not that anonymous. You need a crowd to be anonymous. So the more, even if you don't know what to do to contribute, you're like, I'm not a coder, I don't know anything about Monero. You can still easily partake in Nym by using Nym VPN anonymous mode. Your traffic is mixed with other people, and you're increasing the anonymity of other people that you don't even know. And that's a real benefit for everyone. And so I'm really proud that we've enabled this kind of system.
Yeah, no, I really like what you guys are doing. Like, the world needs a anonymous and secure way to communicate, and I think you guys have done something really kind of like a milestone, basically, launching the first mixnet.
Yeah, well, the main thing we need at this point, more than anything, is really people to download it out and send in bug reports. We know it's still fairly buggy.
Yeah.
So if you just go to nym.com, download it. You can also ask, I think, for free passes to check it out for like an hour or so. Try it out on different platforms. More platforms, the better. The more different Linux distributions, the better. There will be bugs. We have people whose whole job is to fix those bugs, and we need to know about them because we will miss bugs. And unless we fix those bugs, software's not going to get better, and it's going to have less users. And the more people, we don't want tens of people being anonymous. We have thousands of users right now, but what we want is hundreds of thousands, millions of users, because then you're really anonymous. And the more people that use the system, it's kind of funny. You say, oh, the system's kind of slow today, but the fact of the matter is the more people that use it, the faster it gets. That's a really weird, because if I have 1 million people using Nym, I want to be anonymous with 100,000 people, I can actually lower my amount of mixing delays, the amount of time I have to mix, and I can have the same level of being anonymous. And the more different types of people that use it, the more anonymous everyone is. So the more people that use it, the faster and the better the whole system gets. And that's like the reverse. If I'm like putting a transaction in a blockchain, it's an auction for a limited amount of blockchain space. I may not get my Monero transactions in. If I'm running a web server, too many people come, I have to buy new web servers. Like I can't handle the load. I can't handle the amount of traffic. But with Nym, the more traffic you give us, there'll be some bumps in the road where we have to wait for the decentralized system to get a few new servers online. But really, the system should get better the more people use it.
That's amazing. That's super cool. Well, Harry, thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope that people hear this and start using Nym. And it was a pleasure discussing privacy with you.
Definitely. Well, I look forward to sending me a heads up, and I will keep listening to your podcast to learn more about privacy. And hopefully, we can actually meet some people at MoneroCon, and I think Monerotopia next year.
Nice. Yeah, I'll be at the one next year in Mexico. So
Cool.
I'll see
Rock
you
and
there.
roll, man. Take care.
Indeed. Take care.